Hi, and welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast and another episode of Behind the Sessions. I am your host, Dr. Kat. And on today's episode, I'm going to talk about a topic that is coming up more and more, but it's also a discussion through some pretty difficult stuff. I'm going to be talking about abusive family members, and that could potentially include abusive parents of adult kids who are in the period of life where they're having their own kids. So, as I've talked about before on other episodes, and some other guests have talked about, sometimes when you're entering into your life as a parent, you are either pregnant or postpartum, or your partner is, and you're about to have a child, or you've just had a child, it can bring into focus some of your own issues from your past, things that have happened to you previously in life. And sometimes that includes difficult relationships, to say the least, if not abusive relationships with parents, your own parents, or guardians, or other family members like siblings or aunts or uncles. Having your own child can really bring it into sharp focus about how much you care about this new little being. And if you're somebody who has had a history of abuse or are currently in a relationship with a parent or a sibling or another family member who is abusive in many ways, and I'll go into some of those ways later, it can bring into sharp focus how you might think to yourself, I would never do to my child what was done to me or what is being done to me now. So, since this is in general a difficult topic, I just want to give you a heads up that I'm going to be talking about some difficult themes and difficult patterns of abuse. And this behind the sessions is by no means meant to cover every single type of abuse or way that somebody could have been abused by their own family. If this is you, if this resonates for you and this is something you're listening to, if I don't touch on every single type of experience you've had, it's not because it's not valid, or because it didn't happen or doesn't exist. Your experience is valid, and the things you've experienced do deserve attention, and you do deserve to get the type of support in order to move through that and find ways to cope with the pain that you've had and or currently have in your life. It often comes up in therapy for people who've had really difficult relationships with their parents. They might be considering cutting off ties with their parents, other family members, and it is incredibly difficult. Sometimes it's an easy decision, I will say that, but it is also incredibly difficult because there are so many family dynamics that can be involved. Cutting off ties with one parent or one person or two parents could strain relationships with other people in the family. And, anyways, there are multiple ways in which it's complex, and people spend a lot of time, sometimes months, sometimes years, thinking about if they want to or are going to cut off ties with a family member, really weighing out the pros and cons. And I will say again, if this is something that you're going through, I highly suggest that you seek out therapeutic support to help you weigh out those decisions. What I'm talking about today is not meant to be therapy. It's not meant to be advice on what you should or shouldn't do. These decisions are highly individual and deserve the amount of time and consideration that you need in order to come to a decision that you can live with or be at peace with, or just is the best decision for you right now. A lot of the dynamics that come up in therapy now are not that a current adult is being necessarily physically or sexually abused by their parent now in life, but that could have been the case back in their history. And even if that type of abuse isn't happening now, there could still be other types of abuse that remain within the relationship. And again, I'll get into talking about some of those things and be a little bit more specific about types of abuse. But when they're coming into therapy, they're having to really think through what it means to stay in relationship to somebody who is mean, manipulative, or toxic versus staying in that relationship. And if they're not going to be cutting off ties completely, there's still a whole process around what types of boundaries people can create and maintain. For instance, if you are considering cutting ties with a parent who is toxic, stresses you out, somebody you can't have clear, supportive communication with, who is mean, who is demeaning to you, setting a boundary with them often creates its own stress. And I think what's true for a lot of people who've been through these types of stressors with their parents or siblings is, if I set a boundary with them, is it going to create more stress? And it usually does. Because in terms of family systems, if there's a habit or pattern within a family system, the people in that system tend to want to keep it the same way unless everybody's making change together. It's making change in a system where one person is changing is very hard. And typically, oftentimes, anyways, the people that I'm seeing in therapy are the ones in the family who are trying to change things. So it can become a huge emotional burden for those people to be the one person in the family who's trying to change the family dynamic or who's trying to set limits and boundaries in a way that nobody has before. And if you want to layer on top of that, you're pregnant or newly postpartum, and considering all of this, the level of stress and strain that is on you, the level of vulnerability that you might feel in making a big life decision like this, amount of unknown that there might be when you're setting limits with family members who are toxic, leave you feeling incredibly vulnerable when you're already in a vulnerable state. If you're cutting off ties with a family member, that could mean that you're not receiving the little bit of help that they might have offered you, even though, big parentheses, that help might have come with a lot of strings attached. And you could also be weighing that out with, well, staying in relation to this person or these people that bring me such huge amounts of stress is untenable. It's not something you can keep up with. It's not something you can maintain, because you may already be under so much stress with the life transition, and all of the changes that you're going through. And this is part of the complexity that I was touching on before, is that there's not often a very clear decision that's just going to be easy breezy. Any decision in these types of situations can be more like trying to decide between which is the least worst decision to make, if that makes sense. You're not weighing like good decision versus bad decision. You're weighing out, in the many ways in which both of these decisions are hard, which one is the best for me right now, and or for me and my child, and or for me and my new family of choice, like husband, child, that sort of thing. And within that, sometimes people are just trying to choose peace for themselves. They're trying to maintain their own mental wellness. And if there is a toxic family member who continues to kind of dump difficulty into the relationship, judgment, manipulation, all those types of things, it can be really hard to maintain your peace. It can be very hard to maintain your emotional well-being as much as you can given the state of things. I'm going to be a little bit more concrete and go through some of the ways in which family members can be toxic, or abusive, so that if you're in this type of situation, you can hear and understand a little bit more of what would be considered toxic behavior or abusive behavior, or an abusive dynamic. Again, this is not meant to tell you what to do, um, but because I hear enough, frankly, of ways in which partners, um, parents, siblings and other family members create this toxicity, I think it's worthwhile to outline the types of things to look out for and consider. So, one is like constant criticism and belittling. This could be somebody frequently insulting you, calling you names, making you feel worthless, making you feel like you are not enough, or sometimes even that you could never be enough. If if what you are receiving from somebody is, and I'm not talking about just like one off or sometimes, let me say that like anything that I'm saying can come in small doses and still not be okay, for sure. But what I'm talking about today is the constant nature of it, sometimes even the lifelong nature of it. So that's one, constant criticism and belittling. So take a moment and reflect for yourself. Is the insulting or name calling or somebody making you feel worthless or not enough, is that part of what you're experiencing with a family member? Another one is manipulation and guilt tripping. So, does this person in your life use kind of emotional blackmail? Like, if you don't do this, I will blank. Um, or do they guilt you into doing things that you don't want to, that don't align with who you are, that make you feel like if you don't do them, they're going to withdraw love or withdraw connection? Does it feel like that person is controlling your decision making, that you can't make decisions without running it through them or by them? Or if you're in your own decision making process in your own mind, are you thinking of all of the ways in which you'll have to negotiate with them, argue with them in order to get just to even be heard sometimes? Whether they are literally guilt tripping you or the dynamic is such that it's been happening for so long that you already know the response you're going to get from them is negative and manipulative or guilt tripping. Another sign of toxicity or abuse could be excessive control over you, like trying to dictate your life choices, trying to dictate your decisions, who you can and can't be in relationship with, um, what type of career you should have, how you should manage your money, how you should manage your friendships, how you should manage your time, when you should be home. Those types of dictating your life essentially, where they have control or they take control, and you feel obliged for any number of reasons, fear maybe being one of them, that if you don't do what they say, then there will be some sort of repercussion, negative repercussion. Another one could be financial exploitation or financial manipulation, where people use money or the threat of withdrawal of money to get you to do certain things or not do certain things. Well, sometimes this can happen in partnerships and marriages, but it can also happen in other family relationships. Like if your partner, for instance, isn't letting you see your money, see what's happening with your money, if they're putting you on a kind of a budget that makes it so that you can't live comfortably when they are living comfortably and purchasing whatever it is that they want to, but you can't. And that's one way. Or if you have a family member who is only willing to give you financial support if you play by their terms, like telling you you have to live a certain distance from them or close to them, or if you don't live close to them, that they're not going to support you. And another is having a lack of respect for boundaries. And this can be a little bit harder to tell because sometimes, boundaries are a little bit looser depending on situations, or people have different flexibility in boundaries depending on situations. But um, this could look like ignoring your need for space, ignoring your need for privacy, ignoring some of the boundaries or rules or whatever that you have set up. So I'll give you an example of where this can be sort of diffuse and then where it is more clear. So, especially during COVID, for instance, there was like a lot of people really, really needing the boundary of like, if you're going to come over here, you have to have a mask on, you have to wash your hands or use this hand sanitizer, that sort of thing. You absolutely cannot give the baby kisses, that kind of a thing. And I'm using this because it's more of a clear example of like, okay, there's a pandemic. There are very, very clear rules here that a lot of people are trying to follow with new babies. And then, of course, parents would come over or people would come over and like forget that that was a boundary that you had set, or sometimes even think like, oh, well, it's fine. It'll be okay. Um, it'll be okay if I didn't wash my hands, or it'll be okay. Can't I just kiss him on the head or, behind the head or something like that, and try and like negotiate in that way. And certainly if that is part of a longer pattern of ignoring boundaries and an egregious disrespect of your boundary, then yes. And another way that this type of boundary could be very clearly just run right over is if you tell people, if you tell your family member that you do not want visitors in the first week after having a baby. That's your boundary. It's very clear. You don't want anybody to come over. You don't want anybody in the hospital. And they show up anyways. They show up in the hospital, they show up to your house, and as if they have totally disregarded that you set the boundary at all. Usually, those more aggressive type of boundary line stepping are part of a longer history of disrespecting boundaries. Another type of toxic behavior can be emotionally withholding or silent treatment. And this is something I alluded to just a little bit ago. If somebody is withdrawing love, withdrawing connection from you because you didn't, do what they wanted, or they feel betrayed or spited in some kind of a way, and they just stop talking to you for no without explanation. You could be in the same room and they won't look at you, won't talk to you, they won't give you any attention. You feel like a loss of connection, a loss of love because you haven't done what they want to do. That is a type of manipulation. Another one that is much more clearly obvious is physical or verbal intimidation or abuse. So this would be yelling, threats, physical aggression, asserting dominance, making you feel afraid of their presence or of what they might do. When we talk about abuse, this is usually what people think of. That's just the outright physical aggression, interpersonal violence, domestic violence. And even though these types of aggression and violence are more clearly seen as, abusive and toxic, sometimes if it's something that you're used to and your sense of self and sense of confidence has been so worn down, unfortunately, sometimes you yourself can start to justify other behaviors like that or actions like that, and when you're in that situation, it's very dangerous and it can feel very hard to get out of that. You can feel very trapped in that dynamic, and it might be that other people in your life don't even know about it because it usually also comes with shame and blame. Abuse never comes with the abuser taking accountability in a consistent way with change that follows. It's not like a one off where they're like, "Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I had a bad day and I went off and I yelled at you, or I pushed you and I will never do it again," and then they never do it again. Or they're like, "I'm horrified by my own behavior. I'm gonna go get help." And like, not that that's not still abusive, but when there's ongoing abuse, it usually comes with, well, you made me do it, or you're the problem, or you're the reason that this is happening. Some way that the person who is being abusive and toxic does not take accountability for their behavior. And if they do, it's temporary. Um, They may even become very apologetic. They may even say, this is never going to happen again, but then the cycle continues. Things might be okay for a little bit, and then the tension and stress builds and builds and builds until again there's another incident of some kind. So this can feel very confusing, very disorganized, rather very disorienting, um, and sometimes often give people a false sense of hope. The person who's being abused can get a false sense of hope that things are going to get better. And yet the cycle continues. Yet another way that you could experience emotional abuse from a family member is by gaslighting you. Um, in particular, this type of abuse can be really difficult to notice all of the time. Some examples of that can be where, let's say somebody insults you or tells you, like outright tells you you're not good enough, or says something mean to you that makes you feel bad about yourself. And let's say you say something to them about it, like, oh, that didn't make me feel good, or like, why did you talk to me like that? And they say, well, you're just being too sensitive, I was just joking. Or that I didn't say that. And the I didn't say that, when in fact that they did, is like a very direct type of gaslighting, where somebody is denying an experience that happened, and enough so, or enough frequently enough, that it makes you doubt yourself. It makes you feel like if your question to yourself after an interaction with somebody like this is, well, maybe they didn't say it. Maybe I'm like losing my mind, or maybe I'm wrong, or maybe my memory is bad, or maybe they're right. Maybe that type of thing where you're starting to doubt yourself. And even though you can sometimes logically be able to hold on to the fact that, like, yeah, actually they did say that. If it goes on long enough and there's enough doubt created within you, it can have you start doubting your own truth, your own reality, that in fact you did experience that from them. So that like doubting of yourself, like again on this really consistent basis, it just erodes your confidence. It erodes how you think of yourself. It makes you doubt yourself more and more. And some other things could be like comparing and using favoritism. So if you, let's say, are constantly compared to your sibling, if you're told that your sibling is better than you, or that they do things better than you in a way that makes you feel inadequate and like shows favoritism to somebody else, that can be another way that your sense of self, your sense of confidence is being undermined. Another example could be like a consistent disregard for your well being. Somebody who's ignoring your mental health needs, your physical needs, downplaying struggles that you have, um, and in a lot of cases expecting you to deprioritize yourself and prioritize them instead. So your needs matter less than their needs. You can end up setting yourself aside entirely in order to manage their feelings so that they don't get upset. So this could be like disregarding your own needs because you don't want to have to hear from them, um, when you state what your needs are, that them saying, well, like, you're selfish, you shouldn't need anything like that. But then at the same time, they're demanding or asking for their needs to be met. It's like managing their emotions, managing their mental state, managing yourself and even people around you in such a way to not upset somebody, that parent, that sibling, that person. That is a sign that there's something going on. If everybody has to be on tiptoe and walk on eggshells just to make sure not to rock the boat and not have that one person be upset, then that is an indicator um, of some probably pervasive and or long-term type of toxic interactions, type of abuse. Because in some ways, we end up, if you're in a situation like that, you end up over years developing patterns, um, developing family systems to sometimes there's like one parent who is, the parent. Sometimes there are two. But it could be that the whole family system is tiptoeing around that one person in order to not upset them. Because when they're upset, they're emotionally abusive, physically abusive. They are mean or manipulating or controlling, or they withdraw, like I said before, love, money, affection, attention. And in many ways, as children, if we grow up as children in environments like that, and that is the parent you have, which is also the person you have to depend on for your needs to be met, you start to learn how to arrange yourself and shape yourself around their needs so your needs can still get met even if they're just barely met. I mean, like we are wired for connection. We grow up in these family systems, and when they're unhealthy in those kinds of ways, you then also grow up conflating or thinking that, you know, that love is this, or this is what it looks like. And then unfortunately, there's all kinds of other patterns that can happen where you like look for relationships that are similar to what you grew up with. Not intentionally, but it's a really common pattern that happened for people. Anyhow, my point is that you could have developed skills, tools, um, ways of coping because you had to do that when you were younger in order to get your needs met. As we get older and grow out of those systems and family systems, um, sometimes we still engage in those patterns, and most of the time we do, patterns and habits, but in different relationship contexts where you might not even necessarily need that way of coping anymore. But when it comes to you as a parent and as a new parent, thinking into the life that you want to build for your kid, all of these things start to like come into question and can come into question. Or if they're not like blatantly in question in your mind, you might start to notice feelings coming up around the dynamic, around the interactions you're having with these toxic family members. You might start to notice things sort of in some ways like through the eyes of your child, meaning like you would never want your kid to be treated that way, the way you were treated, or the way you're currently being treated, or that you wouldn't want your children to see you being treated this way by your parent. You don't want your kids to learn that they can treat you that way also. And having this perspective, new perspective, can more intensely bring into focus things that you might have already known, but are now just more clear, that you don't want to be around this abusive family member, this toxic family member, or not as much, or you need to set different boundaries. And definitely in some cases, people decide that they have to cut their family member off entirely because it's a safer option for them and for their children to do so. And I'll say that some of my bias here, and something that I hear a lot is people say, well, this is family. You have to figure out a way to stay connected. This is family. Um, there's you shouldn't cut them off. You should love them anyways. You should. And I don't specifically agree with that. I think there are definitely times and ways that if you can maintain relationship with somebody in a way that is no longer harmful for you, then cool. But there are relationships that are that difficult and that toxic that it no longer serves you. It's harmful to you to continue in the relationship. And again, there's so much nuance in here and so much complexity that you really should work through with a therapist. Um, because once you start setting boundaries, other stuff comes up. And a lot of the reason why people either don't set boundaries or like wait to set boundaries is because you may be anticipating having to deal with the aftermath of setting a boundary. And that in and of itself is an indicator. If you feel afraid to set a boundary for fear of what the response will be, that's an indicator that something's not quite right. Because if you're in a healthy relationship, healthy enough, and you set a limit or a boundary with somebody, maybe they'll get upset or maybe they won't understand it, but they won't be abusive to you because of it. That's the difference. In a healthy relationship, there would still be space for discourse. There'd still be space to hear your perspective. There'd still be space for, okay, yeah, we misunderstand each other and maybe even arguing around a point. But if you set a boundary with somebody who you have this history with, and they come back at you telling you you're a horrible person, you're betraying them, it's all your fault, there's nothing that you do is right, and they're guilting you and they're criticizing you and belittling you because of a boundary, again, that's an indicator that this is an unhealthy dynamic, to say the least. And what's difficult is when you become a new parent, you are inherently setting new boundaries and new limits with people because you're now managing this other human's life. There are other things at play. There are other things that this baby needs. There's other things that your family needs, and you might not be able to prioritize an abusive parent of your own in a way that you used to before. You may not be able to give, again, it could be a parent, a sibling, or whoever in your family. You might not be able to give them the attention that you used to. You might not be able to, attend to them or attend to their needs in the way that you used to before. There's so many dynamics that you are weighing through and that might not even be fully clear to you why you feel the way that you feel, what is actually going on. Again, there's already so much transition happening. It would be hard. It would definitely be hard to figure out how you feel, why you feel that way, what they're doing that's making you feel worse. And again, especially if the history is that you've had to sidestep your own experience, your own emotions in order to make space for theirs, it's going to be really hard to bring all of your awareness into understanding all of these factors that are at play and how they're impacting you. So some of the consideration here, like I said before, is can setting different boundaries work? Would that be enough for you to have some distance, some space from this toxic or abusive family member? Or is cutting ties necessary? Has it come to a point where continuing to be in relationship with them in the only way that they will accept is harming you and harming your child potentially? But I usually find, and maybe you can resonate with this, is that the person who is trying to do the work, the person who's been abused, let's say, been the recipient of all these things that we just said, is usually working very hard to try and find a way to stay in a relationship. They're trying to figure out, well, if I do this, then maybe it'll work. If I do that, maybe it'll work, because they are so used to having to bend and shape themselves in ways to make things work. Where I find the rigidity and why relationships usually aren't able to progress is because of the other person. They might have more rigidity, like the person who's toxic or abusive. They might have more rigidity in what they will and won't accept out of you in the relationship. They're typically not all like that insightful or self-reflective or willing to take responsibility. And in order to make a change, you have to have some of those things. You have to be able to think like, oh man, I didn't realize what I was doing was impacting you in that way. That's not what I meant to do. That's not what I want to do. I'm going to try and change. I'm going to work on this. But if you don't have that, if you don't have insight, flexibility, ability to compromise, willingness to change, willingness to see your side of things, it's going to be very hard to be in a relationship that feels like you're being seen, like you're being heard, taken seriously, that your needs are going to be met. And oftentimes people, if they are going to cut off ties with a family member, they will try many, many things before then. They might have tried boundaries for a long time. They might have tried reducing contact with a family member. They might try having clearer communication or as clear as possible. They might even have elicited somebody else to talk with the family member, like an ally or a sibling or something like that, to plead with them to shift and change. Some of the toughest relationships are the ones where there's, when you try and do those things, there's guilt, there's pushback, there's more gaslighting, more of the same. And beyond more of the same, there can be an increase in behavior. So, in any kind of behavioral dynamic, when one person starts to change, as I mentioned before, if the family system is rigid enough, other people in the family system will try and kind of re-engage you to get you kind of back in line, meaning like to get you to be doing what you've always done, which is acquiesce or say fine or give in or whatever that was in the past. There could be a ramping up of behavior to make you feel even more guilty to get you back in line to the dynamic in order to maintain control of you or whatever's going on in the family dynamic. And that makes it really, really difficult to try to set boundaries, to try and continue to engage in healthy or even sometimes unhealthy ways, but to almost try and convince, um, you know, your family member to see your side, to hear what you have to say. So if all of that is happening and you're getting more and more frustrated, of course, I'll say it again, have support, get support, have an ally, have a friend, have another family member, find a therapist, find a mom's group, talk to your partner. What I know for sure is that you shouldn't go through this alone without somebody close to you that you can connect with, that you can talk with, that you can get support from, and who can be sort of like a grounding person outside of the dynamic that you're trying to set boundaries in or break free from. Because it is very, very easy to get pulled back into old dynamics when you don't have somebody or something grounded outside of that dynamic. You need almost like somebody to remind you, like, of why you're doing what you're doing, and why it's good for you, why it's good for your child, well, and any number of reasons, because it can be fairly easy to get kind of sucked back into old dynamics, at first, anyways, until you've built those muscles and done a lot of that um, work to practice setting the limits, practice having different kinds of conversations, until that feels more natural or just automatic for you. It's very important to have somebody else to talk to, if not multiple somebody else's. What I want people to really understand is that choosing this type of peace for yourself, choosing boundaries, choosing to cut ties, if that's what you end up choosing, it's not selfish and you didn't do it for no reason. As I said before, you probably worked your ass off to try and keep the relationship. And if it's not working and if it continues to be toxic and continues to erode your health, your mental health, then it might be a necessary step to pull back a little bit or to cut ties. And it might be necessary for you, it might be necessary for your child, but it is not selfish. And I think it's important to say, I know that it's important to say that out loud because unfortunately, it's probably also in the toxic and abusive dynamic that you've already been called selfish, to be honest, for all of the reasons I already listed. And because for the most part, we live in a culture where, these old sayings like blood is thicker than water, even though I think that's a misquote on that. It's a misuse of that quote. Or that, families forever, or those kinds of things. There's an inherent pressure to stay connected, even through really toxic relationships. And another huge part of this whole process is that if you are setting boundaries, if you are cutting ties, you're also going to be in a grief process. It will mean to you that all of the work that you've tried to do to engage your family member hasn't worked, or that they are not or cannot engage with you in a way that's healthy. And there is a loss in that. There is grief in that. losing a relationship, realizing that that relationship is not what you needed it to be or wanted it to be, or maybe is ever going to be, is really freaking sad. It's upsetting and most definitely can feel like a loss, and it is a loss. Um, it could be an actual loss, like you're not talking to that person anymore, there's no more contact, or it can be a loss of hope that you had hoped that this person that you love and have loved and will love, and even maybe deeply care for, is not going to be that person for you. And I should say that not everybody feels this lovey-doveyness. That is there. Not everybody feels the love. Some people feel just responsibility to family members. It's not always a deep sense of love and connection. However, it's still a loss. It's still potentially grief that you're experiencing. And certainly there are some relationships where parents are trying the hardest they can try. They're doing the best that they can with the skills that they have and missing the mark. And we're all as parents going to miss the mark to some degree on some level. And there are going to be parents who've had their own trauma that are passing down trauma to you or to their kids who may not necessarily know that they're doing that. And I think I save a lot of space in these episodes for those types of parents where we can give the benefit of the doubt, where there is still possibility for healthy or even healthy-ish relationship with boundaries. There are some situations where it's debatable whether you can say that those parents are doing the best that they can do. And I'm not saying that with judgment. I'm saying that because there's real damage that's been done, real damage that a parent has done over years and years and years. Uh, and there's not space for accountability. There's not space for reconciliation. There's not space for apologies and growth and all of that. And those are typically the relationships where I see people cutting ties is okay, yep, you had you can think to yourself about your own parent, like, yeah, you had a horrible childhood. And I can see and list all of the reasons why you behave the way that you behave and all of the things that shaped you to be the person you are. And that doesn't mean I have to continue to stay and be abused. Like those two things can be true. That you can see why and you can understand why. But when there's no accountability, there's no apology, there's no growth, there's no movement, and it's just more of the same or even like a doubling down on the same old stuff, that leaves a lot of room to choose to not be in relationship with that parent or that person in your family. So I want to say too, and this has been a bit of a heavier topic, if this has brought up stuff for you that resonates for you, that you've already been thinking about, or that's new to you, and um, bringing up overwhelm, sadness, anger, any of those things, first of all, it's totally understandable that it would. It would be weird and surprising to me if you had had a history like this and you heard me talking about this and it did nothing. You had no response to it. We we are not robots. We are affected by stories. We're affected by hearing, topics like this. And so if it is impacting you, I really highly suggest you reach out to somebody today, whether again it's a friend or a trusted person in your life or your therapist or anybody who can provide you the support. Since what I'm offering isn't therapy, it's not medical advice, it's not telling you what to do um, in any way. It's really just, man, we need to talk about this stuff because it's real and it happens. And I hear about it from where I sit, but there's not a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue that's super open about these kinds of dynamics, unless you know somebody personally who's been through it. Anyways, there are places where people do talk about it, but oftentimes people, if they've gone through anything like this, they're sitting in silence with it. They're sitting alone with it. Um, they may be experiencing their own shame or guilt or vulnerability because of of it. They might still even be blaming themselves for the state of their family or their family member being upset with them, and that is a painful place to be. That's a hard place to be. So opening a little bit more space to discuss this, to discuss these like cycles of abuse, to discuss having to set boundaries with toxic family members, to talk about the reality that some people face of having to cut ties for their own wellness. These are real things that people deal with. And you as the if that's you as the person who's been through this, it's in my opinion not for you to feel shame about, and it is something for you to hopefully find healing for in whatever way that means for you. Well, if you've made it this far through the episode and been able to stick around and listen, I'm glad you did. And again, if this resonates for you in any way, please know that there's help available. If you find the right fit of a therapist and the right people to surround you with, that you can feel the support that you need to make it through these really difficult phases and decisions in your life. And as usual, if you know somebody that this might resonate for, please send this episode along to them. It is very important to share episodes like this. Maybe if it's even one person, but if you feel comfortable enough to share it widely, do that so that the people who need to hear it can hear it and ideally be encouraged to find the help that they need. So for now, I'll wrap up on those points. And certainly, if you are somebody who's experiencing this, my heart goes out to you. For those of you who are listening to this podcast, if you haven't liked or followed or subscribed, please do that. And if you feel comfortable, leave a star rating or a review of the podcast so that other people can know what you think about the podcast so that they can know if it's the right fit for them. And as usual, I thank you so much for being here. Until next time.